The name actually I don't want to right? But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
Yeah. But,
All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Annual Spirit of the Land Conference. My name is Carly Rogard, and I'm a third-year biology student here in Augustana, and I'm also a member of the Spirit of the Land class, and I am honored to be one of your MCs for this weekend.
And my name is Tamara Savy, and I am a returnee part-time student to Augustana. I was Tamara Clausen, and I attended 32 years ago when it was Camrose Lutheran College. So how is that for lifetime learning for you? I am a fourth-year sociology major, and again, part of the Spirit of the Land class. Before we begin, I'd just like to do some housekeeping mentions here. With regard to washrooms, they're through these doors straight down. There's a reception desk, and if you just go past that desk and to the left are the washrooms. And because we are in the age of technology, and sometimes we forget, I'd like to remind everyone to please turn off turn your phones to vibrate, please. Thank you. So I'd like to wish everyone a welcome to our 5th Annual Spirit of the Land Conference, Reconciling Land, Life, and Livelihood. Thank you all for coming, and a special thank you for all those that may have traveled the distance to be with us tonight. Thank you so much. This conference is hosted by the Spirit of the Land students. And if I may ask these fellow students to please stand, I'd like to thank all of you for your hard work and passionate energy in facilitating this conference. So if you could stand, that would be very much appreciated.
Well, there's a couple of times still up.
I'd also like to give a special thank you to everyone that joined our course each week. We had the honor and pleasure of having the community members share and experience this journey with us. It was a beautiful relationship between students and community members, and it provided a wonderful dynamic and a real wonderful depth and beauty to the course that otherwise I think we wouldn't have had quite an enriching experience. So thank you all for attending with us. Very much appreciated. We hope that you all feel welcome and relaxed and open to share your thoughts and a part of yourself with each other this evening. And now I'd like to please welcome Dean Berger to the podium. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's really fantastic to see such a large and diverse crowd here this evening. Before beginning, I wish to acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. The territory on which the Augustana campus of the University of Alberta is located provided a traveling route and home to the Cree, Blackfoot, and Métis, as it did for the Nakota, Tsuut'ina, Chipewyan, and other Indigenous peoples. Their spiritual and practical relationships to the land create a rich heritage for our learning and our life as a community. I'm particularly pleased and proud tonight for several reasons. First, as a result of the dedication, determination, and inspired leadership of staff, students, and Augustana alumni associated with the Chester Ronning Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life, we are launching tonight the 5th iteration of the Spirit of the Land Conference. This year, with the theme Reconciling Land, Life, and Livelihood. I would particularly like to thank Rajan Rathnavaliu and Carly Engelstad, along with the entire Spirit of the Land class of 2016. With the help of many generous donors, community members, and volunteers, we have virtually institutionalized this conference. Spirit of the Land is a rich educational and programmatic package, and it happens every year at Augustana. My thanks to all of you who have participated, not just this year, but in previous years. Our program this year promises to be amazing, particularly given the extraordinary quality of the speakers we will have the opportunity to hear and engage with in conversation. These include, starting tonight, educator and activist Dr. Alex Wilson, tomorrow, Grand Chief of Treaty 6, Randy Erminskin, environmentalist and activist Karen Mann, environmental journalist David Dodge, founder of the Food, Water, and Wellness Foundation, Kim Cornish, and the founder and director of People Tree in India, Siddhartha. I want to also thank local NGO Sahakarini, which has co-sponsored Siddhartha's visit to Camrose. With each iteration of this conference, the Ronning Center has helped us deepen Augustana's relationship with our Aboriginal neighbors and has created increased opportunities for engaged listening and learning. I especially want to thank Elder John Cryer, who joined us for this morning's pipe ceremony, and Knowledge Keeper Roy Lewis, who is here tonight and will offer a prayer to get us started tomorrow morning. This year, as in the past, we will have opportunities to learn from recent Augustana graduates and also from young people within our own community. They are becoming teachers for all of us, but in turn, we are gaining renewed energy and an increased sense of optimism that what we do here in this tiny niche of post-secondary education is of extraordinary value. Each year, when I greet new students at our opening convocation at Augustana, I present them with a two-part challenge, or perhaps to be more accurate, a two-part invitation. I ask them to speak boldly in order to be heard, and I ask them to listen deeply and respectfully in order to be changed. And that, of course, is the same message I wish to deliver to all of you, and it is my own personal pledge for this weekend. I'm confident that if each of us takes this responsibility seriously, we will discover we have much to learn from one another, we will find important areas of common ground, and we will make important progress toward the creation of what the planners of this conference have called a community land ethic. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight. I wish you a great conference, and welcome again to Augustana.
Thank you so much, Dean Berger. I would now like to call upon Councillor Agnes Helen, who will be saying a few words on behalf of the City of Camrose.
Good evening. I am delighted to be here to participate in this conference and to bring you greetings from the City of Camrose on behalf of Mayor, Lord Mayor, and my fellow councillors. This conference, so well named Spirit of the Land Conference, celebrating 5 years, personifies love of and caring for community on many levels. Areas all woven together in a tapestry defining what constitutes a caring community. Our shared values, dreams, aspirations, that which is sacred. It has been and continues to be a gathering together to listen and dialogue, leaving us all with heightened awareness and the desire to do better, to live better in a caring community. Cultural historian and eco-theologian, theologian, Thomas Berry once said, and I quote, "The natural world is the larger sacred community to which we belong. To be alienated from this community is to become destitute in all that makes us human. To damage this community is to diminish our own existence." End quote. Each of us, in our own ways and within the larger community, strives to do what is better, to improve our community and thus our world. We here in Camrose are proud of several initiatives undertaken in our city. In 2015, Camrose was the first city in Alberta to provide a declaration in support of the Blue Dot environmental rights movement. We support a community garden. We work to enhance collaborations and partnerships around clean and accessible water. Next week, we flip the switch on a 2,886 photovoltaic panel installation, the second largest municipal installation in Western Canada, representing annual power requirement for 118 homes. Other potential city installations are being discussed. By this time next year, we plan to have replaced a total of 2,203 Cobra-style streetlights with LED lamps, which translates to an equivalent power for 133 homes, thus lessening our light pollution. And so, we continue to work together, growing a caring community, honoring and cherishing each other, upholding our mutual values, and then stepping out in action. Thank you to this conference and what you bring to this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Buckland. So next I'm going to call upon Natasha, and she is a fellow student or classmate of Tamara, with Tamara and I, and she will be welcoming our keynote speaker for the evening.
Hello, everyone. We are very honored tonight to have Dr. Alex Wilson come and speak with us tonight. She is devoted in community leadership and education. She, as well as the first First Nations woman to receive her PhD from Harvard. Alex gathered her early lessons in leadership in her home community of Opaskaway Cree Nation. She believes that the most valuable leadership is driven by love for the people, has been borne out in her work as a scholar, educator, mentor, and community worker. She now teaches classes at the U of S in Saskatoon, as well as still working with communities around her. She's part of an organization called Ideal for More, No More, and is still a very open, passionate person in her hometown. So together, let's welcome Dr. Alex Wilson.
Hello everyone, thanks for that introduction, Natasha, and thank you for the organizers for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I appreciate that the Treaty 6 territory was acknowledged, and the people who have made this their home for not just a few hundred, but a few tens of thousands of years. And so tonight I want to talk about relationality, reconciliation, and land, and I think it fits right in with the spirit of the land. And I was really loved the title of the conference, and reading through the information that you have for the agenda tomorrow, I thought, oh, this looks really good. I kind of feel the spirit coming through in the people that I've met already today. In my introduction, though, I kind of want to go back a ways. How much time do we have? Do any of you recognize that constellation? Orion, no?
100.
It's written up there. The constellation in Cree is Isagijak, and I'm from the N dialect of Cree, so that's Swampy Cree dialect. So for those of you that speak Plains Cree, I apologize if the words don't sound exactly the same, but we do have our own regional dialects. And I wanted to start with this because this is part of our cosmology. So anytime we talk about land, we're also necessarily talking about the sky, we're also necessarily talking about water. It's land and all of its relationships. And so we go back to the beginning almost when we start with this constellation. But another reason why I like to start with this is because at this time of the year it's really bright and clear in the sky, and this signifies the time when we start to tell these stories in a different way. We have summer stories, we have winter stories. The uniqueness about Wisagijak is that those stories are often told year-round. And Wisagijak, if you break down the term, the beginning means sour or tart, and Achak, Kitachak is your spirit, so Achak is star. So in the name of our constellation, but also some people call our trickster character, there's an understanding that it's a continuity of energy, and that energy animates or brings life to things. So built into that cosmology also is anti-oppressive theory and anti-oppressive practice. And there's a play on words in the term Wisagijak around sexuality and around a continuum of gender. Because in Cree, on the highest spiritual level, in the old language, there is no gender. It's only our human embodiment and culture that creates gender and gender binaries. So that already kind of blows my mind every time I talk to elders about that. So thinking about the larger cosmos and this notion of spirit and energy. And so I'm very aware that there's this huge organ right here. And so in the spirit of Wisagijak, we also play with words and honor sexuality in all of its healthy and wonderful ways. Some of you might have heard of Daphne Ojig. She just passed away recently, but she did give me permission years ago to use this painting in presentations. And if any of you have been to Manitoba, you might have been to the museum. It used to be called the Museum of Man and Nature. At some point, they allowed women, I guess, recently. So now it's called the Manitoba Museum. But Daphne spent a lot of time in northern Manitoba, in a community next to the community that I'm from. And her painting here depicts or describes or illustrates or demonstrates our origin story. And so linking back to Wisagijak is those are creation stories, but there's an understanding in those stories that we're always creating. So that creative force is in all of us, and And even us sitting here today, we're creating something. So coming together as a group, we're creating a spirit, we're creating energy, and we're creating a story, or many different stories. So in this painting, it's a Cree or Anishinaabe also depiction of how we came to be. And you'll see some characters or things in there that you might find familiar. One is the beaver, you can see an otter, the sky, and you can see that these things have life, so they're animate. Then there's the earth, the turtle, and Wisagi-Jack's the character kind of bringing things together. So that's the energy, the continuum of energy that brings all of us together. Some of you have probably heard of North America being referred to as Turtle Island, so that's part of our story, but in the old language, it's actually not North America, it's the earth itself is the turtle. So the land mass is the turtle. And we have a conflict with the theory of evolution because they're telling the same story, they're just telling them in different ways. So it links back to energy in the universe, and then this mass that we're on that we call Earth. Single-celled organisms changing, evolving to multiple-celled organisms, eventually plant, animal, and then billions and billions of years later, humans. I don't think it happened in 7 days, pretty sure, but that's another story. So there's room for multiple stories and multiple metaphors as well. So again, this is a recognition of territory. This is a recognition that we have an understanding that we come from this land and we're intimately connected to it. So in terms of people on the planet, we have been continuously on our homelands longer than anybody else on the planet. And that's pretty profound to think about. So the knowledge that comes along with that is immense. The knowledge systems that come along with that are immense. So we're at a point now on the planet, and especially in North America, where we don't really have an option. We need to start listening to Indigenous people. We need to start before it's too late, right? And I think that really is what the spirit of the land is about. It's not saying that we are the land, it's saying that we are connected to it in a way that defines and contextualizes who we are as Indigenous people. So some of the other features that I really love about this painting are just the fact that it's so bright in the colors, but you'll also see that everything is connected. And so that, to me, represents the notion or the principle or the idea or the practice of relationality. And every Indigenous culture that I know of anyway has a saying or an acknowledgement or a validation around relationality. A saying or a prayer acknowledging that there's a degree to which we're all related. There's a degree to which everything is related. And it's not just human relations, it goes beyond. So there's a degree to which we're related in terms of our relationship to the environment, our relationship to water, our relationship to the air, and even beyond that, our relationship to concepts and ideas. And with every relationship, there's an accountability that comes with that. So you can't have relationality without relational accountability. And so again, something that's very apropos for the time that we're living in, because we may know some of the relationships, but we may not be living up to the accountability to them. In fact, I would say that we've failed in many cases to live up to that accountability. So the doctrine of discovery, of course, I think you had Sylvia McAdam here either last year or the year before as your keynote, and as you know, this is one of the specialties, one of the things that she researches, and that's the history of the doctrine of discovery and how it's still today is pivotal in terms of Canadian law, especially around Indigenous rights, treaty rights, and land rights. So the doctrine of discovery is linked to this notion of terra nullius, that this land is just an empty land. And this is kind of allowed for the disruption and displacement of Indigenous peoples, not just here, but also around the planet. This is a painting by Erin Consmo, who is Cree Métis from Alberta. And she makes the link to the notion of terra nullius and how women's bodies are kind of treated that way as well. And some of you might have seen the Amnesty International report that was released yesterday, making the connection between resource extraction and violence against Indigenous women. So she's saying our bodies are not terra nullius. So this is where I'm from, in that square there. You'll see that we're on the Saskatchewan River Delta, and where we are today hooks onto that. So we're on the Battleford. Your water goes into the Saskatchewan, and that eventually into the South Saskatchewan and that, or North Saskatchewan. Then that eventually meets around Prince Albert, forms one river, and then drains into Cedar Lake. So anything you put in the water here, we get downstream. There was a study that was done a few years ago that it was a pseudoscience study, just to kind of preface with that. And they found that there was an unusually high degree of queerness in the fish in our region. So I have to thank you for putting the stuff in the water. Because in our community, people jokingly call it the queer Indian capital, because we have a strong and long history of acknowledging gender diversity and gender fluidity. It's not something that came along with colonization. It's something that is part of our cosmology. And again, that's why I started with the Wissahickon story. So the Saskatchewan River Delta is one of the largest freshwater deltas on the planet. You can see that it covers a huge area. Some people call it the lungs of the planet, or the kidney, or the liver of the planet, because what all of that muskeg does is it filters air and it filters water. And so it's really critical for me as someone who's from that region to always talk about that in terms of telling you where I'm from, because it's part of our role to protect that area. I've had two people ask me tonight, when I said I'm from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, they said, "But is that in Manitoba or Saskatchewan?" Neither. Surrounded by the country of Canada. But if you want to know on your GPS, it's around 54 degrees north and 101 degrees west. So it's important to acknowledge, though, like our nationhoods, because before the treaties, the riverways and the waterways were the things that defined our territories. And we had ways of protocol before entering a territory, ways that we would announce our, that we're here. So it is really key to when people say, "Where are you from?" They're not just asking out of politeness. They want to know, which areas of land are you, do you understand? What is the knowledge system that you're talking about? And who are your relatives? And so that's key. So if you started paddling down the river from Edmonton, it might take you about 3.5 weeks to get to my community. Better start now before it freezes. But there have been, over the centuries, over the millennia, many different policies and laws that have been kept in place. And those have been kept in place through stories, legends, and our survival practices. And when you change it to English, it sounds kind of harsh, policies and laws. But I don't know any other way to say it. And some people use the term natural law, but others don't really like that saying either. So it's really our way of being that allowed us not just to survive, but to thrive. So there have been many things that have impacted our delta. There's four, I guess. One is nature, of course, Mother Nature or Father Nature, depending on your paradigm. And others, which impacts climate change as well. The other is that all the waterways are controlled by two entities. The first is Manitoba Hydro, well, three, Sask Power is another one, and the other is Ducks Unlimited. So many people don't realize the power that an American corporation has in, especially northern Manitoba, where they have control over all the waterways. We've been impacted by farms because of all the phosphates that drain into the Saskatchewan River. And also, up until very recently, all the hospitals dumped their stuff into the river, including their sewage. So if you can imagine how all of that drains down to the communities that are downriver that are predominantly First Nations communities. So we are getting it that way as well. So our bodies of water have been regulated by corporate and governmental interess. But not only our bodies of water, but our personal bodies. So our personal bodies have been regulated, for example, through the assimilation policy era, which lasted for over 100 years in Canada, residential school, the Indian Act, Christianity, and other policies. So you can see how the policies that allowed us to survive for tens of thousands of years were shifted very dramatically and rapidly through these regulation policies of the federal government. There's another view of the delta, and you can see that there's the E.B. Campbell Dam on the west side of the delta, and on the right side of the delta, on the east side of the delta is the Grand Rapids Dam. So the Grand Rapids Dam was built in 1964, which coincided at the time when our kids were taken to residential school in our region. So you can see the different intersection of impacts and how in our community not only was a disconnection from familial relations, but also a disconnection from land knowledge. The waterways were within a day no longer safe to navigate in some regions because the water rose so high. Some communities were completely underwater, some were relocated, burial grounds were flooded, and the migration patterns of birds were altered, and the turbidity of the river changed as well, so it impacted our sturgeon and other things that we relied on daily for food. So you can see that all the different angles are kind of impacting us and all having to do with land and the severing of land knowledge. So in terms of culture, because it's ideology that has allowed all of this to happen. So in order to understand ideology, we also need to understand what we mean when we say culture. Because each of us has a culture, some of us have many cultures that we negotiate. And if you think of culture as an iceberg, and I was just in Newfoundland a few weeks ago and I asked them if this is true. Is it true that 7/8 of the iceberg is below the water and 1/8 is above? And they said, generally, yes, we confirm that. And so they're melting, so that may be changing a bit too. But that's an analogy to culture, because what is above the water is about 1/8 of the stuff. And the stuff below the water is about 7/8. So the real core of what culture is not seen, it's not material. But yet, if you think about this narrative of indigenizing that is going on across Canada in post-secondary institutions. It's usually a kind of a clip art approach. We're going to add pictures, or we're going to add kind of add and stir kind of method. But really, we need to go way deeper than that. So in order to have the privilege of gaining Indigenous land knowledge, you have to go deeper. You have to challenge yourself to go beyond the clip art approach. I did a little study at the University of Saskatchewan, informal study, just kind of clicking through the website, looking at images that kind of represented First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous people. And I counted 125 images, and out of those images, there were 111 of, guess what? Any guesses?
Males.
Of what?
Males.
Males? Yeah, most were males, yeah. Any other?
Headdresses.
Teepees and powwow dancers. So kind of headdresses. And so that is the imagination of Canada. That's what they want to see. Teepees and headdresses and powwow dancing. So this is a challenge. I'm asking a call to action here. We need to think deeper than that, because we have knowledge systems that are ancient that can help us in this situation that we're in right now. And so if you look below the water, those are the things like our worldview, our philosophy, our cosmology, how we fit into the larger universe, our epistemology, that's our knowledge systems, ontology, how we know and what we believe to be truth, methodology, that's how we go about finding out new information, and pedagogy is how we teach. All of that is intimately connected to the land. And so if you think about the stuff above the water, those are things like clothing, food, music. They're situational, they can change within a day even. And if you think of your own family, you may have 3 generations of your family. Your grandparents may eat different food than you, dress differently, but your underlying worldview may be the same. So we have it's a shortcut to just kind of focus on the top stuff. It's not saying the stuff on the top isn't important, but what it is saying is there's more to it, and the more to it stuff is really hard to do. So there's a pedagogy and discomfort. So if any of you are feeling discomforted right now, that's really good. And I challenge you to sit in that discomfort, because transformation is possible when you're feeling uncomfortable.
I'm not uncomfortable, but I don't know what pedagogy means.
Pedagogy is the
Yeah,
way you
pedagogy,
teach.
teaching,
Yeah, it's
teaching.
what informs your teaching,
Okay.
the way you go about teaching. Yeah. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments, just raise your hand. So the stuff below the water changes very slowly over time. It's enduring. And so what's happened in the colonization process is the top has been shifted away from the bottom. So if you think about all the kids that went through residential school, over 150,000, those that went through what we call the 60s scoop, those that were removed from their families by the legal system, by the child and family system, over 50,000 people. What do they have if they don't have their connection to land? They have the material aspects of culture to define themselves. And so this notion of decolonization, the project of decolonization, if possible, people are trying to realign the top of the bottom, but we're not sure it's possible. So the stuff below the water is what we want to push people to, is this displacement and replacement. Is that what reconciliation is? We're not sure. Reconciliation is a term that was created by the Catholic Church and other churches historically, as was the term indigenization. It was originally developed as a term to say that we need to reinforce the status quo by indigenizing. So you can already see the parameters of what's available within that terminology. So reconciliation, along with that has to come consent. So consent is a big thing. We're talking about consent in terms of land, in terms of usage of land, in terms of the duty to consult. It's part of the Constitution, Section 35, acknowledging and consulting with Indigenous peoples on anything to do with Indigenous peoples. But what if someone says no? Then what? Who does the reconciliation benefit? Is it to make people feel better, or is it to actually undo systemic oppression? And for those of you that, most of you work in social justice in some way, and I could probably guess that almost all of you here either have been in a relationship, an abusive relationship, or you know a woman that has. That's how common it is in our culture. If you tell the couple to get back together, that's kind of trying to force reconciliation, right? But if the partner that's been dominated does not want to, then what? Then we're in another uncomfortable situation. What if this whole dialogue of reconciliation is not by consent? Another thing to think about. But we'll kind of assume that we're moving towards reconciliation, and we're trying to understand what exactly does that mean. Power and control definitely has been part of it in the historical picture of what's happened to Indigenous people in Canada. So it's not just interpersonal, it's on a mass level. So these are ideologies that inform the way we go about our business, the way we go about our daily lives. So the stuff above the water is the multiculturalism approach, and I think almost every city that I know of in Western Canada anyway, Regina has Mosaic, Saskatoon has Folk Fest, Winnipeg has Folklorama. Those are celebrations of culture, and some people would say, well, okay, that's good, right? Don't we want to celebrate culture? We do, but there's been a problem with that model, and that it keeps everybody at a certain happy place. And happy place is good, but it's also a form of dissociation, and which means that, again, we're not pushing ourselves to get to the real heart of what's actually going on. And so multiculturalism is government-sponsored. It was an act. It's inclusion through tolerance. So Rebecca, I don't know how you would feel if I said I tolerate you. Not to put you on the spot, but I can see your name tag really well. You see how that's problematic, right? It's from the point of view that there's one person that gets to even make that decision, and then tolerate is just like standing, right? It's recognizing that there are different groups. And when we say there are different groups, that again makes the assumption that there's one group that's the right group, and then everything else is different. It's recognizing that we're all equal. Now that doesn't sound too bad from the offset, but are we all equal? Are we all equal?
Some things are more equal than others.
Yes, absolutely. The people in Standing Rock can tell you right now that we are not all equal. And the people here can tell you that as well, I'm sure. So we're not all equal. So it denies the reality and the truth of people's experiences and existence. It's educating for racial harmony, which kind of sounds good, like, let's kind of get along. But again, that's a denial of the reality, because it means that some people are the squeaky wheel. So if we all just get along, again, you're kind of telling some people to be silent. A celebration of cultures. It's new because of immigration. And within that model, culture and ethnicity are definable and unchanging. And we know that cultures change, all cultures change, and they're not definable. It reinforces the four-race myth. We know that there's not 4 races. Western science, indigenous science all has that knowledge, but yet pseudoscience reinforces that model all the time, which actually just reinforces systemic racism. So what we want to do as part of spirit or understanding the spirit of the land is an imperative. We don't really have a choice right now. We have to do it, is to move to an anti-oppressive approach. So land-based education at its core is anti-oppressive. Because if you come from a cosmological view that on the highest spiritual level there's no gender, then that changes your practice, doesn't it? Because we're so trained in Western culture in gender binaries. But what if all of a sudden someone said there's no gender binary? That's how the traditional language works. Even though there's terms, things aren't divided that way. The world is divided by whether something has animacy or spirit, and even that can shift. Some things that are inanimate can become animate. So it's taking responsibility for ending oppression. It's challenging the status quo. It's challenging standards and different forms of supremacy, challenging white supremacy, challenging male supremacy, challenging straight supremacy. It's examining power relations and all the interconnections. And it requires an institutional effort, not just individuals. So again, this is understanding that oppression occurs on an institutional levels. It challenges our stereotypes and the appropriation of cultures. It includes history or her story or their story. And it's funny because, because I'm in the field of education, I visit a lot of schools and talk to kids about this, and they get it right away. But when they hear the term herstory, a lot of adults kind of giggle. But kids just, they get it and they just start using the term. That's how easy it is sometimes, just to shift language, changing to a different language. It challenges assumptions about social constructs such as race and gender. Have any of you thought of gender as a social construct? Probably some of you. So all of that has to do with land, and it has to do with language as well. So what has happened is a disruption and displacement from land knowledge that goes along with genocide. And I've been to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg once, just when it was opening. All the exhibits weren't open yet, but it was was telling to see the way that they constructed the genocide exhibits, and horrific as well to see all of that in one place, but also disappointing that there was even controversy that Indigenous people be included in the genocide exhibit and weren't included in there. So you can see that kind of is telling that we're still in an era where a form of genocide is happening. And femicide is, the mass killing or destruction of women. And along with that is epistemicide. So epistemicide is the severing of knowledge systems. So that's key. The disruption and displacement from knowledge, especially land knowledge. So that goes hand in hand with genocide historically. And there have been different scholars that have talked about it and written and done research. So many people herald or talk about Descartes as one of the most influential Western philosophers. His saying, "I think, therefore I am." And Grossflugel, who's a scholar at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, kind of took that a bit further and said in this era of epistemicide, The saying has gone from I think, therefore I am, to I exterminate, therefore I am, to I conquer, therefore I am. So the doctrine of discovery is still very much prevalent in the narrative around what's happening in the lives of Indigenous people in North America. So the effect of all this, many of you know in this room, the effect has been institutionalized on a societal level and a cultural level. It's been interpersonalized in different forms of oppression, such as racism, homophobia, misogyny, and ableism. And it's meant a disconnection from meaningful relationships to the land and water, and I would even include the air in that and the sky, if you think about our relatives in Hawaii that are protecting Mauna Kea, the mountain, from the 30-meter telescope. And it's allowed for the destruction of land water. So if any of you had been following what's happened in Mount Polley in British Columbia, where the tailing ponds from the mine broke and the contamination got into the lake and then the river, the elders there said that during the residential school era, that kids were taken away from the land. But during this era that we're in right now, the land is being taken away from the kids, from the children, from the next generation. And by taken away, it means being contaminated, or that knowledge is being severed, so the epistemic kind of violence. Violence becomes normalized and internalized. Language is lost or changed. Binary gender roles become entrenched, and other binaries as well. Spirituality becomes institutionalized as religion, and schools and other institutions kind of are responsible for that. So prison, CFS, the healthcare, all of those systems have institutionalized spirituality. So now it has reinforced hegemony, which is privileging a certain worldview while dismissing other worldviews. I would say even Indigenous spirituality has become institutionalized to the point where it starts to become ritualized like rules. So that's what dogma is. Dogma is, that's just the way it is. It's historical, it's linked to colonialism, it's learned, but it's also imposed, and it's contemporary. To the point now where non-Indigenous people become the gatekeepers of Indigenous knowledge and spirituality. And I hear some of you kind of giggling or nodding your heads because you probably know what I'm talking about. If you've ever been at a ceremony and a white person has told an Indigenous person how to act, how to sit, what to wear, what to think, what to do, how to behave, that is the institutionalization of our spirituality. That's a commission of epistemicide. So stop doing that, please. And so, we have these hybridization of ideas and pan-Indianism, as it's called. Some people call it pan-Creeism too, because we do have different Cree knowledges depending on our dialect and our geography. So there are plains people, and there are people that live in the swampy area, like where I'm from, or the people in the bush or whatever. So the resulting dogma has included the perpetuation of heteropatriarchy and promoted male privilege and a hatred and a fear of women. And of course, we know what that has led to. So as educational institutions and people that work in them, and I place myself in this as well, we've kind of propelled or catalyzed this mess. We're now teaching to assessments, measuring the competency of people's culture, cultural knowledge, and teaching to learning outcomes. Knowledge and culture has been commodified, and we saw that at Halloween. That's one of the biggest examples, and then of course sports teams and stuff too. So the reality is, we know there are over 1,200 missing or murdered Aboriginal women in Canada If we take Mexico, Central America into consideration, at least one woman murdered and missing every day. If we look at the trans community in the indigenous communities, in Guatemala, for example, one trans woman missing every week. These aren't reports that we hear in the mainstream media. And all of these other kind of symptoms of a society that does not value Indigenous women. Queer youth suicides, especially First Nations youth, 10 times higher than any other group. There's a declared state of emergency in Attawapiskat, Ontario, earlier this summer around suicide. Same with Cross Lake, Manitoba. But what you didn't hear about Cross Lake is that all those girls that committed suicide were lesbian identified. That was kept from the news. So you can see the intersection now of different forms of oppression around identity and how it links to this longer historical, a bigger historical picture that implicates religion and implicates spirituality and implicates residential schools. So when we're talking reconciliation, we need to remember those groups. We have trans youth, Aboriginal trans identified youth, 56%, that's more than half, have attempted suicide. So if you know a trans identified Aboriginal person, chances are they have attempted suicide. This is serious. Very serious. They're leaving school as early as 3rd grade. Why would a 3rd grader not feel safe in school? Real question. This is a real question. Does anyone have any answers? They don't fit in? Physical threats? Yes, all of those. What about just using the bathroom? Simple thing. I don't know how many of you in your own homes have a separate bathroom for boys and a separate bathroom for girls. Any of you? So these are kind of basic things, right? Well, they should be. So even within our own communities, and this is uncomfortable too, where schools are bringing back spirituality, Indigenous spirituality, smudging in the classroom, trans youth not going to school. Why? Having to choose what side of the circle do you sit on? And so the very thing that each Indigenous person who comes from this land should have the right to is their own spirituality. But by imposing a gender binary, you're denying people of that right. Yep.
So, sliding back, like in Aboriginal culture, do you allow women and identify as?
There's an ethic that kind of underlies the Cree behavior, and I would say it's common in Swampy Cree and probably Plains Cree too, but it's the ethic of non-interference, which means you don't interfere on another person's body. And the other Cree people in here, the elder probably, I don't know, if you would agree with that or not. Yeah. So that's a principle. That's one of those policies that was in place, non-interference. So yeah, somebody called me and they said, we're going to have a smudge at our school and we want to know which side of the circle Two-Spirit people was sitting. I said, the inside, in the circle, not the outside. That's it. It's so basic. But and again, these are uncomfortable conversations we have to have, because if you can change your practice to allow everybody there, to allow everyone to have that spiritual experience, then why wouldn't you want to? Oops. So Yeah, so then homelessness rates are increasing, and for Indigenous people, we don't even say homelessness because we have a home. We do have a home, we're still on it. It's our land, like, it's the houselessness rates that are increasing. And out of the entire country of Canada, only 0.2% is reserve land or First Nations land. So down from 100% a couple hundred years ago to 0.2%. And so if you think again around knowledge and how the land provides knowledge, and then you see that shrinking land base, you can see how important it is to understand that. Still over 1 million acres of land in Manitoba alone not transferred under the treaty land entitlement, and in Canada 880 land claims cases still in court. So Uskie is the land and all of its relationships, and we have a directive to take care of it. So going back to where we started with the constellation Wisagijak, and in the middle of the term Wisagijak is Sagihi, and this is a natural law, Sagihi Wewen. That term, Sagihi, means it's the root for the word love. So there's an understanding that the continuum of energy that has allowed us to be and allows me to be here and all of the Indigenous people that are in this room today is a continuum of energy of love. So this is a very hopeful kind of message. Despite all of everything that's happened, we're still here, we're not going anywhere. It's an underlying philosophy, and some people call it Cree natural law. So there are consequences when you don't follow it, consequences on a literal level, like karma, or like if you damage, or like if you kick a dog, there's a consequence that will come back. If you step on the earth in a certain way, there's a consequence, it comes back. And for any of you who are from the far north in the permafrost region, you know what happens when you step there? Your footprints, they're there for a long time, right? Some people say 100 years. But that's everywhere, it's not just in the permafrost. Everywhere we're stepping on the land, and by stepping, like literally stepping, but also metaphorically stepping, we're creating a chain reaction. And so there's consequence to that. And then there's consequence on a spiritual level as well. And so some of the things that we're seeing happening today in terms of land protection or land defense is trying to rectify that imbalance of the desecration of spiritual law. This is Mauna Kea, as I mentioned. The Idle No More movement started almost 4 years ago, almost to the day actually, in Saskatoon, and started with 4 people. One of them was Sylvia, who was here speaking, and now is a global movement with millions of people involved, and probably many of you have taken part in Idle No More events. Put your hand up if you have. Hi, so I can see. Okay. Looks like all the Indigenous people have. Okay, allies, it's time. So Mauna Kea is the mountain in Hawaii, and I talked about that in terms of the telescope. Again, also the connection to the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we did a call to action or a demand that Two-Spirit and Indigenous LGBTQ people be included in every and all conversations on solutions and interventions when addressing suicide, but also in the calls to action with the TRC. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this because this is in the news. Have all of you heard of Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline? I think most of you have. It's finally getting in the news. So I just returned from there, and so for me this talk is, it's emotional, but it's also catalyzed me in a way that there wasn't such an urgency before, but now I say there's a real urgency. Because this is a photo that was taken a couple of days ago at Standing Rock, and I witnessed this when I was there. And that is the military, and you can see those people on the hills behind. Those are snipers. The National Guard is there in full riot, police in full riot uniforms, with guns, with mace, with pepper spray, with tear gas. That's a form of chemical warfare. According to the United Nations, that's chemical warfare that has been enacted on the people of Standing Rock and the people who are standing in solidarity there to stop the pipeline. And there's about 3,000 people there, maybe or more. And I would say that a lot of them, maybe at least 30 to 40% are non-Indigenous. So it's important for people to show their solidarity no matter what background you're from. And it's like a war zone there. They have the razor wire. They have one road in. They've shut all the other roads. And along that one road, they have double coiled razor wire. So at any second, they could stop that checkpoint, and the people in that camp would be trapped down in that valley. While I was there, there was a fire that was lit, and they had through their cameras, they could see that there were 4 people with torches, drip torches, lighting it. And when we woke up at 3 a.m., the entire hill, from one side to the other on the west side, was on fire. So it was terrifying. There's helicopters and there's police airplanes flying right above the tents all night. So you can't sleep. It's constant, and it's intimidation and it's domination. So this is an urgency. Like, if any of you can go down there, if you have the means to go there, please do. They desperately need your support. If you can't go down there, one of the things that we've been started yesterday was a campaign to get some more solar power to them so that they can send media out. By the way, on my phone I had 5 bars when I was down there, like, where it shows the signal strength, but I couldn't call out or I couldn't send a message. They're scrambling it so people can't call. And when people left the camp the night of the fire to call 911, the 911 operators scoffed at them. And we left and asked the tribal police, why is there no firefighting here? And they said they tried to come in with the tribe tried to come with their fire trucks, and they weren't allowed in because the fire was on the state side. And for hours and hours that fire burned. Luckily the wind shifted, but at around 11 a.m. finally a helicopter came with a bucket of water. So very quickly that entire group could have been massacred. So this is real. So we're started a campaign to provide some more solar paneling. So if any of you that are here want to make a donation, you can do that. To a couple of people have today, and then we'll try to get that sent to them this week as soon as possible. If you're on social media, that's the hashtag that people are using, no DAPL, no Dakota Access Pipeline. And if you have questions about this, I'd be happy to talk about it. Again, it's really fresh in my mind, and I can tell you that it was overwhelming, and it was also heart-wrenching to be there. And I think about those people all the time, and I ask it, if you pray or if you meditate or if you send energy or whatever it is you do, if you put molecules together, I don't know, and whatever works for you, please think about the people there. And at the same time, think about what's going on here. Because to remind you that the water here affects a lot of people downstream. And where the water here comes from, does anyone know? How many of you didn't know that? Few. Where do you get your electricity?
Coach.
Coal?
Yeah, I dare say. Yeah, there must be a coal-fired plant somewhere off in the west. There's about 9 of them, so.
So, whatever's happening in South and North Dakota, those things are happening here too. So, be prepared at some point to either be on this side of the issue or this side of the issue. Because the people at that camp, they're willing to put their lives on the line to stop a pipeline, to protect the water. And you know, in Cree, our word for water is nipi, and that little sound ni also means me, like Nina is me. So the water is connected to who we are as human. The water is our humanity. So without that, obviously, there's no more humans, right? That's built right into the language. So think about what it would take for you to put your life on the line for something. Most mothers would say, you know, you hear about someone like a mother picked up a car to save a child. Well, see, these things can happen. So think about, you know, you may not necessarily have to put your life on the line. You could donate $10, like, take your pick. Or whatever it is. Share something on social media, you know, if you don't have money or whatever. Think of a way that you can help support the efforts of Indigenous people here in this territory, while also supporting other efforts that are happening right now. So this is just kind of a trajectory. Tolerance is like one step away from hate. So this is kind of asking us to move away from hate to at least tolerance. If you're in the hate phase, I don't think you're in the room here, but you never know. To move to tolerance. If you're in the tolerance, kind of push yourself to acceptance. If you're in the acceptance, to kind of push yourself to advocacy. And advocacy, you know, apathy is just really not caring about something, to becoming aware, educating yourself. If you don't know the issues, take the time to learn about them, and then push yourself towards action. So that really should be what reconciliation is about. And I love this poster. I was in someone's office and they had this poster on the wall. It said, if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I would say that that's what it means to be in solidarity, and that's really what reconciliation should be. So, Kinanaskman now, thanks to each and every one of you.
So much, Dr. Wilson. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that to have you here, period, is an honor, but for you to be here sharing a bit of your knowledge and your insight with us, that's truly amazing. So yes, thank you. Okay, so as many of you know, there are many things about this conference that make it unique and make it special. One of them, and probably the most central idea of this conference, is that we have these round tables. So I was speaking to Raj a bit about this last night, and I'm like, Raj, you know, like, how should I explain this to people? And he said that analogy that is commonly used is this is supposed to be like your family table at home. So I'm like, okay, yeah. So I started thinking about this, and I'm like brought back to being 10 years old, and you know, my dad, or my brother rather, was like chucking fish sticks at my head, and I'm like, no, like maybe that's not the atmosphere we're going for. But as I look around the room tonight, I'm reminded of my grandma grandma's kitchen table. And particularly I'm reminded of this because I'll draw your attention to the center of the tables, where we have these beautiful centerpieces which have been provided to us by the Cohen family. And when I think about my grandma's table, it was this kind of this warm and this welcoming atmosphere. So that's more of what we're going for here tonight. So as we continue on into the roundtable discussions, I encourage you to be open and to be vulnerable and to be open to listening to other opinions, because you never will know what kind of insight you may gain from this experience. And after we're done discussing, then there will be a question period where we will open it up back again to Dr. Wilson here, and you guys can pose your questions and we'll go from there. So you're free to now discuss.
Not because it was just because it was
Is this the action plan part?
There's my son. Yeah, that's my son. Oh yeah, we're Valerie. No, we're not. He's only the old. I'm the older one. I was born first time.
I have a question. When I see the word collapse, I can't help but think of Fred.
No, I'm not related to Fred. Fred was a...
No, but I watched that.
He was a single P.
Single P class.
A single P class. Not quite the
But you know
thing.
what? He did say...
I've heard of Fred. I've never met him, but I've heard of him. And there's a whole bunch of them I've heard of, but I know we're not...
Probably one of you two, right? Starring twins?
There's only me and my brother's family with a double P, and everybody else is Fred's relatives. Germany. Yeah, they went. Albert told me.
Here's the myth.
Yeah, Albert told me when they went to Russia, those settlers, they weren't permitted to have double letters in any of their names. So he said we dropped the P. That's what Albert said.
Well, Albert, you can't argue with him.
No, I didn't argue with him because he was the chairman of the school board and I was a teacher.
Oh, so you were the teacher.
Yeah, so I knew him because I was. Anyway.
Question after.
Okay, carry on. Now we got that all.
But it's good for everybody to know where you come from and the fact that you've been a teacher and so you've taught in this area. Yes. Shall we go around?
You had your, where did you leave?
I thought it was right.
Then all of a sudden,
He was my principal. What a disaster that was. Can you imagine what a horrible high school I had? Jeez.
all my help.
Yes, it aged me before my time.
Anyway,
And moving on.
I don't know.
Character, duty, honor, honesty. Actually, I'm not joking. I mean, I didn't quite get all the rules totally imbued until I was about 50, so that's like 6 years ago. But, you know, they were there, percolating away all those years.
Yeah, I think there's been a real. I was just thinking about the tolerance thing, and my mother was a small German girl in southeastern Saskatchewan in the First World War. They were the only German family, and she got this group. So when I grew up, if I showed any signs of intolerance or that kind of stuff, I got it. It didn't matter who it was. So I have. I was good and I can't repudiate. That was a basic thing. So sometimes you get good stuff, and that, but a lot of people don't get that. So there's still lots of hatred and all kinds of stuff, and stereotyping of the native people, the indigenous people. And I mean, she was being very blunt about that. And that's going on all the time. It doesn't help it.
Would have to be
It makes it. In fact, there's a stereotype is that they're sort of second citizens.
Yeah, I think one thing that stereotypes do is they stop you from seeing the person in it. You see the construct. Black skin. Actually, there's not too many black people up in Canada, so, well, indigenous. Okay, in our case, indigenous would be the equivalent of what maybe some guy in Georgia sees when you see someone with black skin. Be careful. And then your brain just shuts off, and your list of information concerning that stereotype comes out, and then well, actually, you're done. You don't need to think anymore. You don't need to perceive. You don't need to interact because you got it policed. And when it's a negative stereotype, it's a negative thing. The funny thing is when it's a positive stereotype, it can almost be as bad. I actually can't think of a very good example for that, but I think it's the part where you cease to see the individual and you start, and you just have a list. Extremely successful major athlete, probably a nice person, we're finished. That's a nice stereotype. Actually, that's kind of a dumb one too, but
I think it goes to your last statement. I've come here to help you, in a sense. Because I don't know what you are or anything like that. And there's a ton of that. That's it. That's where you can. And even a lot of good. Yeah, I know it is. But the first thing is you got to. I think she's saying you got to get involved in dialogue and find out.
You can't leave that to us.
It's not what we think somebody else thinks. So that's where you start. You got to find out if you're going to help somebody. You need
But you need to have people tell you of their own experience, so you're sensitized. We don't even know when we have stereotypes, or we're starting to see by the conference like this, or stories.
From the government to go through. It's all big business. It's all about the money. Storytelling. Oh, good. Oh, look at that. Wow. Darn. We can't come tomorrow. We're working.
Conversation, exchange.
You're very fact.
I think if I were to say, if you know somebody, in the sense of knowing them and listening to their stories, once you know somebody, then you can't go back to the stereotype. And so that's where you have to get to some kind of storytelling. You get to know the person, and then they're a real person, and then you go to
Have a good look. Some choice.
yeah, I like this one.
There you go, Evelyn.
This is not your
Well, I have to make in relating to the talk. I kind of I thought I understood why. I was very uncomfortable with the list of
I have romanticized
Canadians who probably on average promote as virtues.
used to have these roles.
It was a great big list of all the stuff that if you asked a Russian what Canadians are all about, or you asked somebody from Britain,
I've been waiting for
you
years
asked an American what we're all about, they might be able to regurgitate part of that list. It's part of the Canadians tell ourselves about who we are, and then of course, if you tell yourself something, it starts to we actually become reasonable about you know. This was the way I was brought up. This is the way the government is actually, in some sense, tempted to shift regulations around the vacation kind of in that way. kinds of things.
Are we willing
And then to see it as a list of negatives.
the males have oppressed everyone.
I couldn't see why. And then it occurred to me that
We have to
I
stop
might not
being
like any
proud.
list from the government that they've done that ugly to my
I didn't
people.
realize that. I never meet men or women.
It wouldn't matter what the list is. I probably would have something fairly negative to say.
Sanctuary.
It doesn't mean the list is bad. It means the government is bad. The government deals in bad faith on treaty obligations. So somebody, power broker up there, is ignoring their own rules, their own precepts about how they're supposed to deal with people, and they're just doing raw power. They're not signing those 880 treaties. Some of them may not be valid, but probably out of 880, probably at least half have actual legal standing and need to be dealt with. And in bad faith, the government isn't doing so. So then, is it true that the rules of the government are bad? Or is it the people who are executing the rules or failing to execute the rules? I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of what's wrong with where's your power? Anyway, that was a part of the talk that I actually got uncomfortable. It was a list of all the things that I think are nice about Canadians. Whether they're true or not is another point, but none of it was a bad list. And I thought, well, okay, well now what do I do?
Yeah, well, she was trying to make it.
I'm sure there's a lot of women
She didn't make it that comfortable.